Well, as you may know, rapper 50 Cent has been teasing a documentary about his purported rival, Sean Diddy Combs, for more than a year. But now the 4-part docuseries has finally premiered on Netflix. The series explores Combs' life, from his upbringing, the creation of Bad Boy Entertainment, to all of the allegations of assault and sexual abuse since the 1990s. And it also investigates his alleged connection to the deaths of iconic rappers Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur, featuring insights from those close to him, witnesses from his racketeering and sex trafficking trial, and jurors who heard weeks of testimony.
The fallout always starts the same way, slow at first, almost quiet, almost like the world is trying to pretend nothing has changed. But beneath that surface silence, pressure builds, anger builds, suspicion builds.
Combs is locked up in a New Jersey prison cell, serving a 4-year sentence after he was convicted on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution during his very high-profile federal trial earlier this year. A jury acquitted him of the top charges in the indictment, conspiracy to engage in racketeering, as well as 2 counts of sex trafficking. Now, the allegations against Combs, they have dominated the headlines since November of 2023. That's when his ex, Cassandra Ventura Fine, filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the music mogul, claiming he abused her during their 10-year relationship. And since then, he's not only faced this criminal trial, but also dozens of civil lawsuits that were filed on behalf of alleged victims. And many of the lawsuits include claims of sexual misconduct and rape and more. But to be clear, Combs and his legal team, they have adamantly denied any and all accusations of wrongdoing. Since Combs' arrest at the Park Hyatt Hotel in Manhattan in September of 2024, there have been several documentaries that have been released about the rapper's rise to the top of the music industry. There have been shows about his trial, but one of the most anticipated retrospectives is from a reportedly years-long rival of Combs, rapper Curtis Jackson, better known as 50 Cent. He is the executive producer of this project, initially teasing it with the title Diddy Do It, but the series was retitled Sean Combs: The Reckoning. It was released on Netflix on December 2nd, and it has skyrocketed to the top of the charts. In fact, 50 Cent posted on his Instagram on Wednesday, #1 on Netflix. You know, if you really like this docuseries, I'll make more, LOL. Now, the documentary's director, Alexandra Stapleton, said in a statement to Billboard, quote, "This isn't just about the story of Sean Combs or the story of Cassie or the story of any of the victims or the allegations against him or the trial. Ultimately, this story is a mirror reflecting us as the public and what we are saying when we put our celebrities on such a high pedestal. I hope this documentary is a wake-up call for how we idolize people and to understand that everybody is a human being." Okay, but here's the thing. Just one day before the series was set to air, Combs' attorneys sent a cease and desist letter to the streaming giant, calling the documentary essentially a hit piece, demanding it be removed. Now we're going to take a closer look at that letter, the arguments that Combs' team is making for all of this to be taken down. But first, I want to talk about some of the biggest, maybe most shocking moments from the series, and then we'll get to the C&D letter. So to do all that, I want to welcome back on Elizabeth Vulai, legal counsel here at Law and Crime, who knows a thing or two about the inner workings of the media and when things are brought in. But you also watched the entire show. Elizabeth, it's good to see you. Thanks for taking the time. Now, you watched all of it. What was your main takeaway from the series? As somebody who actively followed the Diddy criminal case, has been here on Sidebar talking about the case, talking about his civil cases that he's facing, what was your main takeaway?
Yeah, there were a couple of takeaways. I think it was a really sort of original documentary, well put together. There were 4 episodes, usually most of them around an hour long, so it's very thorough. I think the 2 key takeaways were, one, everybody's talking about access to this footage and where it came from. One of the things that I think Diddy had done was he had said he'd hired a videographer. He's someone who films himself, as we've come to know, for most of his career and life. So he had hired this videographer to kind of follow him through this process. I'm not sure if the thinking was, he thought that he might evade the charges and come out with his own documentary afterwards. But just the access of footage that we get, we hear him speaking to his legal team. It's very rare you get an insight into that because, again, that's usually covered under attorney-client privilege. So speaking to his legal team, kind of his own thoughts about what was going on, because also remember, at this point, we really hadn't heard Diddy talk much about this. He had issued an apology over that video of him and Cassandra.
And then someone finally speaks up. Someone who's not afraid to rip away the comfortable lies and expose the mess beneath. The moment that commentary drops, everything shifts. The illusion breaks. The masks fall. The industry freezes. And the scandal at the center of it all transforms from rumor into a full-blown implosion. This is where the storm truly begins. The commentary opens with a tone that cuts like a blade, sharp, unforgiving, and completely uninterested in protecting anyone's feelings. It starts by calling out the hypocrisy surrounding the figure at the center of this new scandal. For years, this mysterious figure crafted an image so polished it blinded people. They projected power, control, charm, influence. They convinced the world they were untouchable. And for a long time, people believed it. They believed the stories, the success, the wealth, the lifestyle. They believed the persona. They believed the myth. But now, with the scandal exploding into the public eye, the myth collapses instantly. The commentary dives straight into the contradiction.
Found out that my voice and Elizabeth Milner's voice, Queen Elizabeth, were both in the documentary, I think in like episode 4 when it was going into the trial or in his arrest. You know, it was interesting. I'll talk more. I am curious about what you think of that footage, and we'll talk about how it factors into the cease and desist letter. First of all, no attorney-client privilege, because if he is actively, deliberately, knowingly recording that, the privilege, anything that he says to his attorney, that's waived, right?
Correct. So that was one of the first thoughts I had is he's speaking to Mark Agnifilo, who's the lead attorney on his legal team. They're talking about, overall case strategy, the indictment that they expect to come down. My first thought was, we've never seen this before. This must be privileged. But again, you forget there's a videographer in the room. So when you think about attorney-client communications, yes, that's usually covered under privilege. But if you have a third party that you're inviting into those communications, that's not necessary, unless the person is an interpreter or maybe an accountant. If you have a videographer that's there not for legal reasons, you can make that argument that, the privilege is waived.
And by the way, that conversation, the actual context of it, it's something that we always were thinking was going on behind the scenes. There was a sense of frustration about how the media and social media was portraying Diddy and the narrative, and he was like, we're losing. And he was getting a bit combative with Mark Agnifilo about what was going on. And he's like, look, I did everything. You said I'm basically an ideal client, a star client. I did everything you want. I came to New York. And he was just waiting to see if he would be arrested and indicted. And that was a bit of tension there, which it's a rare behind the scenes glimpse of what those conversations and what those moments are between an accused and their defense attorney before the hammer drops.
Yes, very rare. And that's, I think, one of the things that struck me and what a lot of people are talking about. Again, you don't usually get a window into that. I think the push and pull was, in the conversation, Mark Agnifilo had said, look, an indictment hasn't been dropped yet. The indictment came down September 16th of last year. And Mark Agnifilo had said it's mid-September at that point. So I think the indictment was really just about to drop. So at that point, you have Diddy who, he said, look, I've come to New York. I've basically surrendered. His legal team is taking the position, you have to cooperate and kind of show that you're here ready to take this head on. But then Diddy's sort of saying, we need to get someone out there on the comms front, as somebody who's, in his words, has dealt with the dirty side of media and propaganda. So I think what Diddy was trying to say was, there's nothing to be done legally on the criminal front because no indictment had been dropped yet. But in the court of public opinion, it seemed like he wanted to take a more aggressive approach to put a certain message out there. And his attorney seemed to kind of think the opposite.
And just to be clear, so the documentary begins with this shot of Combs in his hotel room in New York. This is, I believe, just 6 days before his arrest last year. Turns out Combs had hired this videographer to film him while he's in New York. The documentary's producers got their hands on this footage, and he's talking on speakerphone with Mark Agnifilo, this high-powered attorney, who is, by the way, just one of several lawyers he would have on his multi-person legal team, and says that more needs to be done to help his public image, that it appeared to him like they were losing. And remember, again, this is before he was officially indicted and arrested. Now, apparently he knew it was coming. He'd been under investigation for months at this point. In a statement to NBC News, Combs' publicist, Judah Engelmeyer, said, quote, "The footage was created for an entirely different purpose under an arrangement that was never completed, and no rights were ever transferred to Netflix. A payment dispute between outside parties does not create permission for Netflix to use unlicensed private material. None of this footage came from Mr. Combs or his team, and its inclusion raises serious questions about how it was obtained and why Netflix chose to use it." Now, Elizabeth, we're going to talk more about what Combs' legal team has to say in this cease and desist letter, but
it points out how someone who built their entire reputation on strength now looks cornered and fragile. How someone who claimed loyalty now finds themselves abandoned. How someone who operated in shadows now has every secret dragged into the light. And the voice delivering the commentary doesn't soften it. It doesn't pretend to be neutral or diplomatic. It speaks with the confidence of someone who's seen too much and stayed quiet for too long. It explains how the cracks were visible for years, cracks in the stories, cracks in the behavior, cracks in the carefully curated public mask. People saw glimpses of disturbing things but brushed them off. They dismissed the rumors. They ignored the signs. They told themselves that powerful people always attract hate. They convinced themselves that everything strange was just part of the persona. But the commentary makes one thing clear: the truth was always right there. People just didn't want to see it. Then it digs deeper. The fallout didn't start with the scandal itself, it started with the years leading up to it. The years of manipulation disguised as confidence. The years.
What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, it's hard to say because there's still such a big question mark in the air because, Curtis Jackson, aka 50 Cent, is one of the executive producers on this series. Him, the director, Netflix in general, is not saying where they got this footage, only that it was obtained legally. Diddy's side is saying this is coming from a videographer I hired. I know we'll get into the cease and desist. One of the arguments they make is, this is subject to NDAs or agreements that the videographer had signed with Diddy because he was, employed by Diddy, and therefore the footage belongs to Diddy. That's the argument that they're making. So it's difficult to say because Netflix is not really saying how or where they got this footage from. One of the things that they did say was that it was sent to them legally. So, if you have the videographer sending the footage to them physically, that would be fine, but it does leave a question mark about where the legal rights are coming from. The only really avenue I see is if there's some way that the videographer had obtained a license for the footage, then the videographer would have the ability to take that license and then transfer the footage over to Netflix. But if the footage belongs to Diddy, then that's a little bit tough.
That's a good point. Okay, let's keep that in mind. We'll talk about that in a minute. I do want to talk about the content of the series. So the series featured interviews with many people who were at one point in Combs' inner circle. This includes Aubrey O'Day, who was a member of the girl group Danity Kane, which was created on Combs' MTV show Making the Band. She has since accused Combs of basically grooming her, firing her for refusing to give in to his alleged sexual advances. We have Albie Shore, singer, songwriter, former record executive, dated Kim Porter before she was in a relationship with Combs. There's Roger Bonds, one of Combs' apparent former bodyguards, who's gone on the record to say that he knew Combs was allegedly physically violent with his then girlfriend, Cassie. At one point in his interview with the documentary's producers, he said of Combs, "When I first met him, I liked him as a person because I didn't know him." You have Kalina Harper, who was part of Combs' group Diddy Dirty Money, released a statement supporting him after the third member of that group, Dawn Richard, had filed a lawsuit against Combs. And in the documentary, Combs can be heard calling Harper to complain about the lawsuit, asking her to put out a statement. A former friend, business partner of Combs, who appears throughout the documentary, is Kirk Burroughs, the co-founder of Bad Boy Records. The two apparently worked very closely together for years. Burroughs served as the general manager, handling the rapidly growing company's funds. And according to Burroughs, when they started Bad Boy, Burroughs was given a 25% stake in the company, with the other 75% being in Combs' mother's name, Janice Combs' name. And we're going to get more into why Burroughs alleges it was set up that way in just a second. But according to Burroughs, Combs allegedly threatened him in 1996 with a baseball bat, forcing him to sign over his stake. So Burroughs apparently sued in 2003. The lawsuit was thrown out because too much time had passed since the alleged incident. And more recently, Burroughs sued Janice Combs for fraud, Combs himself for sexual harassment. This is according to a report from Cinemaholic. And those appear to be ongoing, by the way. Now, Burroughs claims that he was blacklisted from the entertainment industry, led to periods of homelessness. He's since re-entered the music industry, starting Pop Life Entertainment in 2018. This is also per Cinemaholic. So, Elizabeth, there's a lot here. But what did you make of the Burroughs part where he was proving, this kind of relationship that he had and that he was coerced into giving up his stake in what would become a multi-million-dollar company? I mean, I guess the allegation is basically that Diddy ruined his life.
Yeah, that was there are a lot of difficult moments in the documentary. I watched all 4 episodes as mentioned, and that was a tough one. And again, information that we hadn't really seen before in prior documentaries. So, this is someone who had co-founded Bad Boy Entertainment with him. A lot of the things he was saying seemed to kind of run along the theme that I think prosecutors were trying to push in the actual case, was that in the prosecutor's view, this is
years of fear disguised as respect. The years of control disguised as leadership. The commentary describes how this mysterious figure used influence like a weapon, bending situations, relationships, and entire environments to their will. It explains how they surrounded themselves with people who would never question them, how they used rewards to keep some people close and fear to keep others silent, how they exercised dominance in ways that looked powerful from the outside but rotted everything from the inside. The commentary exposes how the scandal didn't create the downfall, it merely revealed what was already there. The voice explaining all this does so with a brutal kind of clarity. It talks about how the scandal finally forced the public to confront the darker undercurrents everyone pretended didn't exist. It describes how the figure at the center operated in ways that pushed boundaries, manipulated situations, and left a trail of damaged people behind them. It recounts how the public always saw the celebrations but never saw the consequences. From there,
Somebody who will do anything to basically get what he wants. He doesn't really care what effects or damage that causes to other people. And it's in different ways, right? Whether it's in the context of alleged abuse, business disputes, alleged sexual assaults, things that have been alleged in the civil lawsuits against him. And I think with Burroughs, it was really, kind of seemed to strike that theme as well, because he's saying, he had forced me out of the stake of my company. He had to deal with things like homelessness, while in the 2000s and 2010s, Diddy was really prospering, music, business, fashion. And one of the things that he had said, what he alleged in the documentary, and again, this is an allegation from him, was that the name Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs's name was not really involved in that on the corporate side. And one of the things he's saying is the reason for that was to avoid having to pay any liability from, the devastating basketball game that had happened in the early 90s, where he was the subject of wrongful death lawsuits because of the multiple deaths that had occurred as a result of that basketball game that Diddy was behind organizing. So that was really, surprising to hear.
Yeah, that was a big allegation, because the families of the victims killed in that stampede, it was horrible. We're talking about December 28th, 1991. Combs, fellow rapper Heavy D, they hosted this charity basketball game. The game took place at the gymnasium of the City College of New York. And according to the New York Daily News, before the basketball game started, people who weren't let inside, they broke a window, swarmed toward the entrance of the gym, all went down a staircase. The doors at the bottom of those stairs opened towards the stairs, not towards the gym. So once a crowd got down there, they couldn't get the doors open and people started being crushed. 9 people died, dozens of others were injured. And there were no criminal charges that were ever filed against anyone for the stampede, but multiple families and injured victims, they filed lawsuits. And that's just one part, right? So I actually wanted to get into this too. The docuseries devoted a lot of time to the killings of Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls and Combs' alleged connections to this, to both men, obviously knew both of them. So there have been accusations made in the past that Combs' involvement in the East Coast, West Coast rap feud of the 90s, there was more than just talk, that it could have involved things like hit orders. Now, to be clear, these are allegations. There's no evidence to suggest this. This series, though, it emphasizes that he has never been investigated or charged regarding their assassinations. Nevertheless, several interviewees during this documentary expressed that Combs' actions seem suspicious in hindsight. The documentary plays part of an interview that Dwayne Keefe D. Davis did with investigators looking into Tupac's murder, which had become a cold case. And on the tapes, Keefe D. says that Combs agreed to pay him if he killed Tupac and also rival record label head Suge Knight. Now, Davis allegedly admitted that his nephew Orlando Anderson was the one who shot the men, killing Tupac, injuring Knight. But Davis says Combs never came through with any payment. And by the way, Davis is currently awaiting trial for Tupac's murder in Las Vegas. Combs has always denied any involvement in the assassination. That was a big moment, I would say. Elizabeth, that was a big part of this. I didn't know that was going to be a part of this documentary.
I was really surprised as well. So I believe it's the second episode that dedicates a lot of time to it. And like you said, there have been insinuations in the past. They played video clips of, Sean Combs being asked in prior interviews in the 90s and 2000s, do you know, who killed these men? Did you have any involvement? He's always denied it. To be clear, these are just allegations. But yeah, that was really, really shocking. And one of the sort of a little bit more of the backstory behind his alleged involvement with Tupac was that a lot of the interviewees in the documentary were saying that Biggie, who was signed with Bad Boy and who was really close with Diddy at the time, was starting to form a friendship with Tupac, and they were getting really close. And a lot of the interviewees were saying, in their view, Diddy didn't really appreciate that. So I think a lot of the themes that you see again is coming up as him sort of wanting.
The commentary expands to the broader collapse happening around the figure, the sudden distancing, the quiet phone calls, the frantic attempts to sever ties, the disappearing allies, the brands pretending they never had a relationship. The industry scrambling to rewrite history. The commentary exposes it all, the coldness, the panic, the cowardice, and highlights how the fall of one powerful person reveals the true character of everyone around them. But the most brutal part of the commentary comes when it begins dissecting the disturbing hidden facts emerging from the scandal. It talks about strange incidents long rumored but never confirmed. It talks about patterns that were brushed aside as eccentricity. It talks about a level of control that went far beyond normal ambition. It talks about environments where people felt trapped, monitored, manipulated. It talks about the subtle ways the figure used influence to blur lines, break boundaries, and shape reality to fit their desires. Nothing is said directly, no details tied to names, but the tone conveys everything: the danger, the darkness.
Wanting and needing to be the number one person in people's lives, whether it was personal, business. And it's really interesting because you see a lot of the themes that, again, the prosecution was trying to push forward that we saw in his personal life with Cassandra Ventura, always needing to be number one, not necessarily regarding the damages he's doing to other people in the prosecution's eyes, right? Playing out in the business sense. So the backstory is that he didn't appreciate the friendship that was forming between Biggie and Tupac, and therefore, that's where his alleged involvement came in. And then when, in terms of the non-payment, I think that was also a really shocking moment as well, because that's something we saw happening over and over in the documentary. Multiple people who were saying, I was cheated out of my share in the company. I wasn't paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. And allegedly, that's sort of how he treated the artists that were on his label. So again, it's the theme of always wanting to be number one and, not necessarily giving people their due, business sense or personal sense.
Okay, so with that, I will tell you, I think one of the most shocking allegations comes to Biggie Smalls, okay? You talk about finances, you talk about that, okay. One of the biggest names at Bad Boy, seemingly very close friends with Sean Combs. Well, according to Kirk Burrows, Combs, and again, this is his allegation, according to Kirk Burrows, Combs insisted that Biggie travel to Los Angeles as part of an album tour, and this is despite, the serious dangers that were present from the rivalries, the East Coast, West Coast. And once there, Combs allegedly decided to cancel a trip that Biggie was supposed to take to the UK, instead saying he needed to stay in LA. Combs apparently threw a large party, and after which, someone opened fire on the car that Biggie was riding in, killing him. Now, Burrows alleges that Combs used all of this publicity around Biggie's murder and his massive funeral to just gain his own fame for his own benefit, shooting to the top of the charts with the song Missing You, which featured, by the way, Biggie's widow. But this was one salacious claim that I really wasn't expecting. According to Burrows, Combs, allegedly, charged the costs of that massive funeral to Biggie's estate and had Biggie's recently renegotiated contract changed to make it more favorable for Bad Boy Records and less favorable for Biggie's loved ones after his death. Elizabeth, again, that one I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, it was really unexpected. And again, I think it speaks to the strength of the documentary, just at least creatively and what they were able to get in terms of the interviewees, claims that we hadn't heard before. So the claims were that, he had wanted, in the documentary, the interviews talk about, Diddy had said, we need to put on the biggest funeral New York has ever seen for Biggie. And when apparently, allegedly, when he saw how much it would cost, that's when he had said, we'll be charging this to the estate, allegedly. One of the other things was he had wanted to put out that song about Biggie after he had passed away, and that was really a big moment. He had performed it at the MTV Movie Awards. And then one of the other claims was, Biggie was set to debut on the cover of Rolling Stone, or at least be on the cover of Rolling Stone. And allegedly, one of the interviewees says after he had passed, Sean Combs had called him and said, I'm coming out with my first solo album. I need that cover. So Sean Combs had allegedly taken that cover from Biggie even after he had passed away. And again, it kind of rides to this theme of, in the public, his friend had passed away. He was devastated. But sort of what you see behind the scenes, at least what the documentary is alleging, is all the different ways he's using that to help benefit him financially and in terms of his career, which is something that we hadn't seen before. And, even myself, like I'm sure you empathize, Jesse, as a millennial, we grew up seeing Diddy, knowing the backstory of him and Biggie and sort of knowing that song and thinking, oh, they were close friends. He paid tribute to his friend. That's so moving. And then to hear all of these allegations, it really paints, another picture.
The twisted logic that fueled the behavior. The commentary makes it clear that these hidden facts didn't just appear recently, they were always there. The difference is that now the world is finally paying attention. The commentary also breaks down the psychological downfall. It describes how someone who once thrived on authority is now unraveling, how the confident posture has turned into frantic denial, how the once commanding voice now cracks with desperation, how the attempts to control the narrative fall flat as more layers peel away. The commentary paints a vivid picture of someone collapsing under the weight of their own choices. And as the fallout spreads, the commentary starts analyzing the reactions from the public. Some people are shocked, some claim they always knew, some remain in denial, clinging to old illusions. Some refuse to believe anything unless it aligns with the myth they idolized. But the commentary dismisses all that noise. It says the truth doesn't care about feelings or nostalgia. It doesn't care about loyalty or emotional investment. It only cares about reality, and that reality is now undeniable.
Hoping that that will persuade the judge, given everything else, particularly as you noted, like the really, really unusual nature of this particular Mann Act conviction and the fact that he's already been in prison, or jail rather, for like 11 months. This case is a one-off to begin with, but we're not aware of any case like this with a Mann Act conviction where anyone's done that much time to begin with. So.
And prosecutors, I'm imagining, have come back or will come back and say, well, listen, look, after the raids on his property, he engaged, or what they will say, he allegedly engaged in criminal activity and, obviously violence, they say, with Jane. But they say, look, what was in his hotel room when he was picked up in New York. They made allegations of what he was trying to do while he was in the MDC, whether it was using other inmates' phone privileges to have three-way phone calls. That was litigated before trial. What would be your response to say, you make the point that he is a changed person. The violence that was shown during the course of this trial is from years ago. But how would you convince the judge to say, listen, we are being truthful, we are being honest, we are being forefront, that he really is a different human being? Because the judge, again, this was right after the verdict and didn't have an opportunity for a briefing schedule. How can you make the argument that he is different and that he should be trusted?
Well, I think, the point you mentioned about the arrest, unfortunately, Sean has struggled with drug addiction for a long time. And I think one of the good things and positive things is that has come out of his incarceration. It's given him an opportunity, to rehabilitate. He's committed to continuing that. He's committed to a long-term program of therapy and helping with the domestic violence problem that he's had in the past. So, at a certain point, you have to just maybe it is a leap of faith, but you have to just give a person another chance. And he really is committed to change and to there being a new chapter of service on his part. So, I think we have to hope that the judge will agree with that. And I think we've made a strong case for that.
Do you know when the judge might make a decision on bail?
We don't know.
Okay. If he denies release again, does that give you a sense of what sentencing could be like? Now, to be clear, my understanding is Judge Arun Subramanian even said at the point, if I make a decision on release, it's not indicative of where I'm leaning towards sentencing. I know there's a pre-sentencing investigation still being conducted or has been conducted. There's a lot of factors to consider. But I have to ask about whether this is going to, have an effect on sentencing. Do you believe it's going to have an effect on sentencing? Does it give you a preview of where the judge is lining up? Because my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, you are probably going to be arguing for time served, maybe a minimum of 21 to 27 months. Where do you think the judge is going to go here?
Yeah, I think that you have to take each step at a time and that the judge is not going to prejudge that. There's a lot more information he needs to get, not only the pre-sentence report, but we're going to make a very fulsome sentencing submission. And he's going to have, a much more detailed picture. Even, the trial was about the charges, right? And he doesn't have the full picture of all the factors about Sean's life that he's going to consider. There's going to be a big fight about the sentencing guidelines. We think actually we're going to end up arguing for an even lower guideline range than we had originally believed at the time of the verdict, where we didn't have we had like a couple of hours to try to figure out what to say about bail. So, I hope the judge will grant bail, but I feel confident that even if he doesn't, it doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to sentence Sean to time served. He's going to take everything into account when he gets.
The commentary becomes bolder as it continues. It talks about how scandals like this reveal the ugly side of the industry, how power can warp everything, how money can bury truths, how fame creates an environment where dark habits flourish unnoticed. It exposes how people trade morality for connections, how they remain silent for access, how they enable destructive behavior in exchange for proximity to influence. And the fallout spills into every corner of the ecosystem. The commentary explains how the scandal forces a reckoning, not just for the figure at the center, but for everyone who participated in the illusion. It shows how the downfall threatens to expose more hidden secrets, how it destabilizes relationships, alliances, and reputations, how people who thought they were safe now feel vulnerable, how the entire structure surrounding the figure begins to shake. As the script progresses, the commentary shifts tone, not softer, but more analytical. Now the focus is on the aftermath. The silence from certain people becomes suspicious. The sudden outrage from others becomes performative. The new stories surfacing become increasingly disturbing, and the commentary weaves it together like a tapestry of corruption, manipulation, and decay. It describes how the fallout affects the figure's environment, the empty homes, the suddenly barren social circle, the sense of being watched, the paranoia of wondering who will speak next. It describes the psychological pressure, the insomnia, the frantic attempts to maintain an image that no longer exists. It describes the slow realization that control is slipping, that the power dynamic has reversed, that the world is no longer bending to their will. Then the commentary widens the lens again. It reflects on the deeper meaning of the scandal, the warning it sends, the patterns it exposes, the dangers it highlights. It talks about how unchecked power becomes a breeding ground for darkness, how charisma can disguise coercion. It says the fallout is far from over. The scandal is only beginning. More truths will surface, more stories will break, more people will come forward, and the figure at the center will face a reality they spent years avoiding, the reality that power doesn't erase consequences forever. The commentary leaves no room for misunderstanding. The collapse has begun, and nothing will restore what has already shattered.